Good evening, folks. I think that we have corrected both our sight and sound problems, so we'll have to come up with something new for tonight.
Should make it hard.
We're going to explore the entire compendium of technical difficulties. All right, I can see a number of you on the screen, and I've already recorded your presence, including Ken Vabar, Donna Carter, Zeke Flores, Annette Miner, Rhonda Newbold, and Lisa Caldwell.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I will quickly go through these other names right here. Might holler if you hear your name and I have not noticed you. Teresa Aldrich, Amber Bernhardt, Mark Cabrera, Michelle Flores, Audrey Grizzle, Veronica Juarez, Alex London, Camille Morales, Emmanuel Ogedengbe, Karen Sanders, B. and Ruth Shelburne, Austin Tidwell, Maria Trevino, Connie Williams, and Reginald Wyatt. Okay. One thing that would be helpful to me, some of you who are on Zoom here, if you notice somebody joins us, and maybe I don't notice because my mind is on teaching, and multitasking is difficult enough because one thing is one too many when it comes to me. If you see somebody join, feel free to holler out and remind me that somebody joined and I need to note their attendance. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, tonight, there we go.
Hey, Ed.
Looks like I have lost a couple of pages here, or I got rid of them without intending to. Okay, we are on March 7th. This is the 7th session, it looks like. And we have come to our final named judge. Let me see if I can get this to where it will share on Zoom. Yeah, there we go. All right. Samson, which we have entitled Brawn Without Brain. I used to hear Dad wanting volunteers when I was young quite frequently. He wanted somebody with a strong back and a weak mind. It was a common phrase back in the day. Well, Samson would have fit the bill. He is the last judge that we have named, is the last major judge cycle. You may remember we had in this book, we have basically a double introduction and a double conclusion that are wrapped around 6 major judge cycles. And there are an additional few minor judges that are just mentioned very briefly and wrapped around these 6 major stories. So tonight we'll be dealing with Samson, and then in the following 2 weeks, though we will probably, I think we decided last time that we would take a break for spring break, and so we will, is that next week? So we will not be meeting next week. If you show up and I'm not here, then maybe that will jog your memory that you shouldn't be here either. And then we'll pick up on the following week with the first part of the double conclusion. Okay. Okay, my screen sharing is paused. Why is that? Thank you.
Maybe you can talk faster.
Okay. We're in Judges chapter 13. Let's begin with a word of prayer because I would very much appreciate the Lord's wisdom and help as we go through this. Our Father God, we thank you for the power of your Spirit and the power of your word. And we invite your Spirit to take up his sword and to wield it in our hearts and lives. You said, Father, that your word is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. So would you, by your anointing, teach us individually and together what you would have us to know. Impress on our hearts, minds, and spirits your eternal truth, and apply those things specifically for our need of this hour. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we start with the immortal words. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Who would have guessed it? Again, these words always signal the beginning of a new cycle. And they do in this case. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. If you have been checking, and probably not because we've thrown a lot of information at you, but this is by far the longest period of oppression that we will find in the book of Judges. In fact, the next longest was half of this was about 20 years, maybe even 18. So this is a big one. Basically, things are getting worse as we go. The Lord is becoming increasingly unhappy with the people. This marriage, you might say, is deteriorating rapidly. And so we have a very long period of oppression. And for the first time, when we come to the end of this judge, the oppression will not, in fact, be over. It will be lessened, but it will not be over. The deliverance in this case is not a complete deliverance, as it is in the other cases. I have never seen this. I have wondered a couple of times, but there are planes that crash in public places. There are planes that crash in the presence of actual witnesses who see that final nosedive. And that must be a fairly traumatic thing if you care for people, if you have a normal kind of conscience. Well, what we are witnessing in this particular episode as we move from here toward the end of the book is that the plane Israel, which has been troubled for some time, it's had a smoking engine or two, and its attitude in flight has been a little bit cockeyed, is about to go over into a nosedive, and is about to hit the ground with catastrophic force. This is a tragic, tragic moment. And this moment is kind of symbolized by the fact that one of the key words in the story of Samson is a verb that says, and he went down. It's repeated 5 times. He went down, and it's almost like the narrator is saying, he and the nation with him are going down. I know they didn't have planes back then, but nonetheless, of course, the fact is, he spends most of his time in Philistine country. The Philistines live near the coast. Israel, by contrast, though north of the Philistines, their Israelites were on the coast. Mostly as you go inland, you go up into the hill country. And so if you were going from a place in Israel, certainly a place in Judah, down to the Philistine country, you would go down. Rand McNally had not been born, had not put together his cartography. And so they did not speak of going up or down based on north or south on a map like we would. They spoke about up or down based on people who had the experience of having to walk from point A to point B. And if you had to go uphill, if you increased in your elevation, well, that was considered up. It didn't matter if you went from north to south or from west to east, didn't matter. It was a matter of elevation that controlled the use of the language. Okay, verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah of the tribe of the Danites. You might remember that Dan was the one tribe, according to chapter 1, that was not able to successfully really take any of the country that had been allotted to them. They were the only tribe that was shut out of their inheritance by the superior military might of the Canaanites. So they were almost a people without a country. They were really, based on the slim information we have, they were kind of clustered around 2 or 3 towns, and pretty much all lived there at this point. One of those towns was the town of Zorah, which was on the border with Judah. So there was a certain man of the tribe of the Danites whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. It kind of emphasizes that, doesn't it? She was barren, and by the way, she also had no children. Well, you covered that, didn't you? Yeah, but it's repeated for emphasis. And if you think that's a little bit of emphasis, wait till the next verse. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, you are barren and have not borne children. Okay, that makes 4 repetitions, right? He says to her what the narrator just said. The angel is not exactly sparing her feelings. He is laying it on. Here's the situation with you. And we mentioned last time that for an Israelite woman to die without having born children was considered a great shame and reproach. It was a terrible defeat. But the angel goes on. And you may recall that this, in fact, you're going to see several links between this story and the story of Gideon. The Gideon and Abimelech cycle was the last cycle that we looked at. Well, actually, no, that was the one before. Jephthah was the last cycle we looked at. The angel of the Lord had also appeared specifically in person to Gideon when he was threshing wheat in a winepress, you may recall, hiding from the Midianites. So here again, the angel of the Lord appears, and he says to this woman, the wife of Manoah, you're barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. This is one of the less famous stories of a barren woman being given a promised child, a miracle child by God in the Testaments. Obviously, John the Baptist was one of these cases, Sarah, and then Isaac and Rebekah, and then Rachel was one of these cases. So God very often weaves this into the story somehow. But he gives her very specific instructions. Verse 4, now therefore, be careful and drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. That's the second time he said that. So we hear 4 times that she's barren and has no children. And now we have heard twice that she will conceive and bear a son, which makes 1, 2, 3, 4 if you deal with all the verbs. 4, no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Notice he didn't say that he will deliver Israel, he will begin. And that's exactly what turns out to be the case. Okay, the word Nazarite is based on NZR. It is a Hebrew verbal root that basically means to be set apart. Has nothing to do with the town of Nazareth. That's not what's at issue here. A Nazarite was one who was set apart or who set him or herself apart to God for a specific period of time. And that was a time in which the Nazarite would be under a vow to accomplish something or to do something for God or on behalf of God. During the time of the vow, the Nazarite, according to Numbers chapter 6, in verses 1 through 21, describe the Nazarite and what is necessary for the Nazarite. There were 3 basic things that were required of a Nazarite. Number 1, no wine, no grape juice, in fact, nothing from the vine. No fermented drink during the period of the vow. Second, the hair was not to be cut during the period of the vow. So if the vow was for 2 months, or if it was no shave October, like some of us have celebrated in recent times, then no razor during that period. Third, The Nazarite was to avoid all contact with a corpse, with a dead body, which would render them unclean and would nullify the period of the vow. Remember those because they will turn out to be important in our story. Interestingly, not only is the child who is to be born going to be a Nazarite, but even Mama is told that she is not to drink any alcoholic beverage during the period of her pregnancy, and she is to eat nothing unclean. Verse 6, then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God. This was a name that was used for a prophet. It could also be used perhaps for an angel in certain settings. She figures he's from God. She may not know any more than that, but she figures that he is a man carrying God's message. She tells her husband, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God. She doesn't use the word Yahweh, just God in the generic. Very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink and eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Now the angel did not add that final phrase, but she did. Maybe the angel said it and we just didn't, but interestingly, she adds the words to the day of his death. Now, what is Manoah's wife's name? We do not know. There are 4 prominent women in the Samson story. 3 of them are never named, including his mama. Verse 8. Then Manoah prayed to Yahweh and said, O Lord, O Master, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. There's going to be all kinds of irony in this story. Manoah seems to act almost the part of the jealous husband in this story. It's like the woman had, his wife had a theophany, and this man talks to her. And by the way, conversation between a married woman and another man in public was not smiled upon greatly in this time. So it was a little bit odd in the first place. And Manoah asked God to send the messenger back. So the messenger comes back, but Manoah is still not there. He comes to her again. But obediently, verse 10, the woman ran quickly and told her husband, behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. And Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, now, when your words come true, what is to be the child's manner of life, and what is his mission? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. He basically brushes the question away and says, what I told her. She needs to do what I told her. He then goes on and specifies, she may not eat of anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink or eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. So Manoah asks, how are we to raise this kid? Well, the angel had already told his wife how they were to raise the kid. He didn't get any new information, basically. So verse 15, Manoah said to the angel of Yahweh, please let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to Yahweh. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of Yahweh. Apparently he had a human form, in spite of being very awesome. What's going on here? We're not entirely sure, but this may be an attempt on Manoah's part to manipulate the messenger. If he was to feed the messenger, then that would perhaps, in the culture of the time, place that messenger under some kind of obligation to Manoah. It's almost like, well, if I prepared a meal for you, now you are obligated to me to fulfill what you've said. And the angel again, when Manoah asks for additional information, the angel kind of pushes him away. When Manoah says, well, let us feed you, and the angel says, no, no. But if you want to offer something to God, go ahead. Verse 13 or 17 rather. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name, so that when your words come true, we may honor you? And the angel of the Lord said to him, no. Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? The word here in Hebrew is a word that means hard or difficult or beyond understanding. It is the same word that God used when Sarah had laughed in disbelief when she heard that she was going to conceive and have a child, being a barren woman. And the Lord asked, is anything too hard for the Lord? Same word. Is anything too wonderful? Is anything too difficult for God? Here again, Manoah may be attempting to, in some way, manipulate the situation. According to one of the commentators that I read, he said, for a human to know the name of a divine messenger was for the human to be able to acquire some kind of power or hold over that messenger. And again, the angel kind of brushes him off and says, no, not going to tell you. By the way, this word wonderful, this root word appears in another place, rather surprisingly, in Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. This is the word. The angel says, this is my name. Interesting. So Manoah, verse 19, took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. My name is Wonderful. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. And the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. Well, yes. This again is very similar to the Gideon account, remember? Gideon had prepared a sacrifice and placed it on the rock at the angel's instructions. And that time, the angel himself, by touching the rock with his staff, had caused the fire to spring up and burned up the sacrifice, and that the angel disappeared. It doesn't say he rose up in the flame, but he disappeared. And Gideon realized this was a theophany. This was an appearance of God. Well, this time, evidently, the fire is not miraculous. Manoah puts the offering, the food offering, on the rock. He lights the fire, but then the angel enters into the fire and apparently ascends up to heaven in the flame. Verse 22, Manoah said to his wife, we shall surely die, for we have seen God. Well, Gideon thought the same thing, remember? And God said, no, you're not going to die. I just gave you instructions. You've got a job to do. Manoah here appears to be pretty obtuse. He seems to get everything wrong in this passage. And his wife comes out being the very logical and sensible one. Verse 23, his wife said to him, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering in our hands, or shown us all these things, or now announced to us such things as these. It's logical. God just gave us a set of instructions. Why would he kill us now? Verse 24, and the woman bore a son and named his name Shimshon, Samson. And the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Machane Dan, the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. This is an amazing amount of buildup. Could it be that in Israel's continual decline and descent into ruin, that God would finally raise up a leader who would be truly a prince and a man of God? This is a lot of buildup. This time, we're not just going to have somebody plucked off the street or somebody who happens to be a good warrior like Jephthah. Now we have all this preparation. before the child is even born. In fact, it's a miraculous birth. God is choosing a Nazarite. God is giving special instructions for the purity of mom and for the purity of the son. This person is going to be set apart to God. Maybe, just maybe, Israel's fortunes are going to change. Maybe God is raising up somebody truly special. Maybe. The only fly in the ointment of this passage is the name the woman gives her son, which is Samson. Most names, or at least a great many names of this period, contained a theophoric element, an element of God. If you were a Canaanite, you'd be named after your gods. If you were Babylonian, you were named after Babylonian gods. Most Israelites who have the terms Je or Jo, Johanan, or Je, or that end in AH, these are forms of Yahweh as a part of the name. Or El, Daniel is God is my judge. Instead of naming the child something that would have part of Yahweh's name in it, she actually names him after perhaps the sun god Shemesh, who was a Canaanite god. Shemesh, Shimshon, is basically the name son. Samson is named not son, S-O-N, but S-U-N. He's named, basically, Shon is the ending is a diminutive, like senorita is a diminutive. So he's named little son or sonny boy. It's what he's called. But he's also possibly named in honor of the sun god, who is Canaanite. Kind of scary. In fact, Beth Shemesh, the town which was the house of the sun, was just a few miles from here, and could have been a cultic center for the worship of the sun god. Nonetheless, we're told that the Lord blessed him, verse 24, and verse 25, that the Spirit of the Lord is beginning to stir and rest on him. Okay, that brings us to chapter 14. The story now becomes quite complex, and we're not going to do anything more than touch the tips of the detail, because there's quite a bit of story here. But there are several parts that have to come together for the plot to unfold. Verse 1. Samson went down. Did I mention going down? Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 7, many other places, they were not supposed to be intermarrying with these people. For somebody who was a Nazarite, of all people, to marry a foreign and pagan woman was an absolute no-no. But Samson fell in love with this gal. At least he admired her appearance. And he says to his parents, this was a time of arranged marriages, get her for me. But his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. Most versions say because she is suitable or because I like her. But this is a literal rendering of the Hebrew. She is right in my eyes. This is probably the key phrase in the entire book of Judges. Over and over, we read that the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. In the eyes of the Lord. Here we find the phrase for the first time used to describe somebody else's viewpoint. Samson says, I want her because she looks good in my eyes. This is not what you'd expect from a Nazarite. Well, verse 4, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. This is God playing the role of William Wallace in Braveheart. With his face painted blue, he looks over at the opposing force of the English soldiers and he turns to his friend and he says, I'm going to pick a fight. God's going to pick a fight. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Verse 5. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. There are no lions in Israel at this late date, but there are lions in India on one side of Israel, and there are lions in Africa on the other side of Israel. And during this particular period, lions also lived here. Verse 6, then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, let's see, did I mention that we would find weird weapons in this book? How about no weapon? You're facing a lion with no weapon except his hands. He had nothing in his hand, but he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. I've never done that either, but evidently it's supposed to be relatively easy. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. It sounded like they went down together, his parents and he on the journey, but evidently at this point they had separated. He is attacked by a lion, and it doesn't go well for the lion. This is the first indication of the way in which this Nazirite would be different. Nothing in what the angel told us led us to expect that Samson would be unusually strong. That wasn't stated, but that clearly is in play here. Verse 7, then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. Here we go again. Right in my eyes. Did you ever love a girl, any of you, or those of you who are women, did you ever love a boy that was right in your eyes at the time, but was really, really wrong? You thought it was Mr. Right, and boy, oh boy, were you disappointed? Happens, doesn't it? Verse 8, after some days, he returned to take her, that is, the woman, for his wife, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. These bees worked fast. And he scraped it out into his hands, and he went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. He didn't tell him he even killed a lion, that he had met a lion. All right, let's go back to those Nazirite vows. What were the three things that a Nazirite? Number one,
Drink wine.
no alcoholics. Number two, you don't cut your hair. And number three, you don't. Okay. Now, when the lion came after him, you can't blame Samson for defending himself. If one of those two was going to come out alive, right? So he had to kill the lion. By the way, according to scripture, if he did come into contact with a dead body, he had to undergo an extensive rite of purification. He had to cut his hair. He had to spend about 2 weeks or longer becoming purified, none of which Samson did. And not only did Samson come into contact with a dead body when he killed the stupid lion, then he goes back, digs inside it. And by the way, this is not a place that bees would normally inhabit. Flies and maggots, yes, but not bees. This whole situation is very unique. And then, not only does he defile himself, but he defiles his father and mother by giving them food that came out of a dead carcass and not telling them where it came from. Samson is basically turning into very, very strange Nazirite. Verse 10, his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. And as soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. This might have been a standard part of Philistine marriage rites. We simply don't know. Verse 12, and Samson said to them, let me now put a riddle to you. You discover that Samson was quite a poet. He celebrates every special event with a line or two. If you can tell me what the riddle is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. This he says to his 30 companions that were given him. And they said to him, put your riddle that we may hear it. By the way, there's a word here for the feast. This word for feast basically was a word that meant 30 days of drinking and carousing. It was a week-long stag party, is what it was. Now, the scripture does not say in so many words that Samson imbibed alcoholic beverages during this period, but he engaged in a feast, which word means that's basically what you do. So that would mean that he had broken a second of the 3 standard Nazirite requirements. They said, put your riddle that we may hear it. Verse 14, and he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Well, you know, and I know, because we just read the story about the lion, but there is no way on earth that the Philistines could have any idea. This was not a fair riddle. And in 3 days, they could not solve the riddle. Not a problem. They have 7 days, right? But on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, okay, she's not his wife. She is his intended, but to be betrothed was regarded essentially as being the wife. It wasn't like our engagement where you could back out. So they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? You tell us, you find out for us, or we're going to kill you. We're going to burn you. Nice people. And Samson's wife wept over him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, I have not told my father or mother, and shall I tell you? So she pulled the tears card. She wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted. And on the 7th day, he told her, because she pressed him hard. And then she told the riddle to her people. And the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? They waited until the very last minute to let Samson think he had won. And then they spring their little trap. And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Well, we know the riddle wasn't fair in the first place, but the fact remains, they cheated. How do we know that Samson is saying that? Because you don't plow with a heifer, you plow with an ox. A heifer was not typically used for plowing. You're not supposed to plow with a cow. You plow with a bull. So what he's saying is, you cheated. Well, they had to.
You wanted to replay.
All right. Verse 19, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Remember, it did the same thing when the lion came out. Well, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and murdered 30 men of the town. Now, I put that word in there. Did I not tell you last time that the Spirit of the Lord being on somebody was not an indication of their merit or character? The Spirit of the Lord comes on him, and he goes and kills 30 innocent men in order to collect their garments to pay off the bet. By the way, the town of Ashkelon was a good 20 miles away, which was hopefully far enough that Samson thought that news wouldn't get back immediately. So he took their spoil and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle, and in hot anger, he went back to his father's house. It's like he goes and commits this horrific act of violence, scoops up the payment, gives it to the 30 companions, and in hot anger turns tail and walks away and goes home. Verse 20, and Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. Sheesh, not a good story. Chapter 15, verse 1, after some days at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went down to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber, but her father would not allow him to go in. Samson had not gotten the news that his wife had been sublet, had been given to another. And her father said, I really thought you hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. Honor is hard to find in anyone in this story. Samson had walked off in hot anger, and the bride's father thought he had simply walked out of the whole deal. Gives away the woman. After some days, when Samson's cooled down, he comes back to claim his wife and discovers she ain't there, not his wife anymore. Consolation prize. How about her younger sister? Just shades of Laban here. Remember when Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel and woke up with Leah? Said the same thing. You can have both. Well, verse 3, Samson said to them, this time I will be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. You almost get the impression that Samson here recognizes that some of his earlier behavior was less than honorable, but he says, this time I have a right. So, verse 4, he went and caught 300 foxes. How he did that, I will never know. I worked in pest control for 7 years. I don't know how you catch 300 foxes. And he took torches and he turned them tail to tail. That would be the foxes. And he put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines. And he set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. We get the impression that the grain was at harvest time, so that some of it was still in the fields. Some of it had been gathered and collected and stacked. And Samson just deals complete devastation to their harvest. Foxes with burning fire in their tail region were highly motivated to make tracks. And they did, right through the standing grain. And they burned up that and the olive orchards as well. In a time where food insecurity was much stronger than it is today, this was a serious, serious blow. I grew up in a country where people lived hand to mouth. It was subsistence farming, and the crop had to come in that year if you were going to eat that year. It wasn't like you could say, oh, well, we'll just go to the supermarket and get something else. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? Verse 6, and they said, Samson, because he has taken his wife and given her to her companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Isn't this ironic? This was exactly what they threatened to do if she didn't find out the riddle. Well, she found out the riddle. She did everything they asked of her. And she still winds up burned. And Samson said to them, if this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Edom. So first, Samson kills 30 Philistines to collect their garments to pay off his bet. Then, when he finds out that his wife has been given away, he burns the grain, the Philistines' grain. And when in retaliation for that, the Philistines kill his wife and her father, he slaughters a bunch more of them. This term hip and thigh is a strange phrase in the Hebrew. Basically, one commentator, if I can find this, yes, he struck them leg on thigh is what it literally means, a tremendous slaughter. A literal translation would be he left them a tangle of legs and thighs. He killed so many of them, they were just a bundle of limbs, a pile of legs and thighs. And then he left. You'll notice that the whole sequence, the whole dynamic of the story of Samson is based on a single thing, revenge. The whole story turns around, you did this to me, so I'm going to do that to you. Well, if you did that to me, well, I'm going to do this back to you. And on and on and on it goes. Revenge becomes the entire key to this cycle. By the way, you may recall that God had told Israel to set up 6 cities of refuge, 3 on the Cisjordan side and the 3 on the Transjordan side, where a person who accidentally killed somebody, not deliberately, but manslaughter without intent, they could flee there so that the revenge cycle would be stopped. That's what this was for. Literally, God did not blame a relative who sought revenge. Relatives were allowed to do that unless the perpetrator of the crime had fled to one of these cities, and there they could not touch them. Also, by the way, some people think that the eye for an eye and the tooth for a tooth law in Scripture is harsh. But do you realize that in the context of the Old Testament and similar law at that time, it was actually a very lenient law? The purpose of the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was to limit revenge. It literally meant that if somebody had gouged out or destroyed your eye, the very most you could do to that person was to gouge out or destroy their eye. You could not value add. You could not do more. Why? How does revenge work? If you cut me off in traffic and I'm upset with you, what do? I'm going to cut you off and then stand on my brakes. I'm going to give you back what you gave me plus a little. And then when you get mad because of that, it gets ratcheted up a little more and a little more. That's the way revenge works. That's why it's so dangerous. Verse 9. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah, remember that the people of Israel are under Philistine domination. In this story, though, they do not cry out to God for deliverance. This is the first time where they do not cry out. They're so beaten down, they're just content to live as defeated. So the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they said, "We have come to bind Samson, to do to him what? As he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom, and they said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, I did to them." What a mature, thoughtful person Samson is. Aren't we glad that his mama went all those months on clean food and no alcohol so that he could be such an outstanding servant of God? Verse 12, and the Judahites said to him, "We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves." They said, "No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes, and they brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. That would be the 3rd time we've seen that phrase. And the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found, here's the weirdest weapon we've discovered yet in the book of Judges, a fresh jawbone of a donkey. Put out his hand and he took it, and with it he struck, read, killed 1,000 men. And because he was pretty proud of himself, he made a poem. That's what Samson liked to do. And Samson said, with a jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, literally in the Hebrew, with the jawbone of a donkey. By the way, the term jawbone and donkey have the same 3 letters in Hebrew. They're identical in their basic structure, except for the vowels. So he's using a word play. Or maybe it's donkey and heaps, I forget. But anyway, the whole thing is based on basically a similarity of sound. He's making a pun. With the jawbone of a donkey, 1 heap, 2 heaps is what the Hebrew literally says. With the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. By the way, the heaps here probably was a reference to the heaps of dead bodies. Those of you who have seen the movie 300, where the Spartans stack up a wall of dead Persians as a barrier against the oncoming troops, it's a rather awful looking scene. This is kind of what's suggested by that. As soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand. Hey, it was more than he had with the lion, right? And the place was called Ramath Lehi, which means hill of the jawbone. By the way, this heaps upon heaps is probably with the jawbone of a donkey. He's probably calling the Philistines donkeys. Basically what's being suggested here. With a donkey jawbone, I slew 1,000 donkeys. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, "You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, And shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? This is the first time we have any record of Samson even looking toward heaven. First time he's ever addressed God. And he does it because he is thirsty to the point of death. Verse 19, and God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned and he revived. Therefore it is called En Hakore, which means spring of the caller. It is at Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. All right, that's the first half of the Samson cycle. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I will return at 6:27, give or take.
Brother David, before you go,
Yes,
wouldn't he have also been, wouldn't it have been unclean for him to use the jawbone as well? Because it's part of an animal?
you are absolutely correct. Not only was it part of an animal, but it says it was a fresh jawbone, which means that it was a fresh carcass. It was a fresh dead body. So this was yet another violation of his Nazirite vow. That is
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
Didn't have a leg of sand on it.
All he had was a jawbone.
That's right.
I was about to run up and go get me a glass of water.
There you go.
What are you doing?
Well, if you don't like that one, just throw it. Guarantee it won't taste any better.
Do you remember? They will come back to me.
Somebody from.
Newell
San Angelo.
Burke.
Oh,
Newell
yeah.
Burke?
Newell and
Yeah.
Farah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, Martin.
Uh,
Martin Farah.
Yeah.
Newell used to say that his wife would make coffee, he would stand his spoon up in. But when Matt Doyle Porter, he said, you give that man a pound of coffee in an irrigation well, you'll make coffee for the city of Wilk.
The corner made weak coffee.
That was certainly Newell's impression.
When I was working at San Angelo Center's own college, working at night, there was an old woman. She had to be at least 80 by then, working 7 of them at night. And when she was, there was usually 2 of us on, sometimes 3. But if she was ever on, she was the one who made coffee. I like my coffee, it tastes like coffee. And there was an ex-Marine who was also working while he was going to school, but he liked his coffee. But her stuff, we would pour a half cup and then fill the rest with water. But she would probably put 3 scoops for each cup. Wow. And it was strong. It didn't even smell good.
Is your mother doing better
She is somewhat better.
Yeah.
As of what, Sunday?
as of Sunday? Mhm. Mhm.
Pretty rough go
Kind
before
of
that.
everything's regulated. did they?
Well, they had put her on a new diabetes medication,
Mhm.
and it turned out that virtually every negative side effect that was listed for that thing, she was,
She got it. huh? Uh,
it was just messing her up. So what you got off that?
mhm.
That's the reason I say read the directions before you take any of this stuff.
Yeah.
These
Good job.
prescription commercials, these RX commercials that have to
Oh,
list,
Oh.
you've been required to do all this, the side effects, this and possible death.
Yeah.
I always want to go.
Yes.
Even if I could remember, I would say, well, there's somebody who won't take medicine that says possible death. I mean, it's so infinitesimal. You have to take 2-3 bottles out of it.
get in the car. There's a possibility.
That's truth.
But it works psychologically too. I remember when Carol Rose had, what's that? Where your tendons here, carpal tunnel syndrome. He started talking about it and we were both working UPS. I mean, for 2 weeks after that, my arms hurt just like he described it.
Talking about psychological.
Is that like a common pain when someone's had an amputation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Lord said to share each other's burdens. I guess I was helping him get through the pain.
Chevy.
My mother has a condition similar to that.
What the thing was.
She'll say, take off that sweater, you're making me hot.
She may be hearing everything you're saying about that. You better be careful.
She's heard it before.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Caution was never one of my virtues. All right, we are back. I'm going to have to reload my share screen here. Okay. I told you there were 4 women that featured prominently in the Samson story. We have passed through the first 2. There was his mama, and then there was the Timnite wife that was given to somebody else. The second half of the story involves the next 2. The first is a prostitute, great Nazarite. This is actually a very brief section of the story, but remarkable in its own way. Samson went to Gaza, that's another Philistine city, and there he saw a prostitute and he went into her. By the way, Gaza was located on the coast, and it was the southernmost Philistine city of the 5 cities of the Philistines, meaning that Samson had to cross the entire length of Philistia to go to the complete opposite end of Philistine. This was a long distance booty call is what this was. He went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute and went into her. The Gazites or the Gazites were told, Samson has come here. By this point, Samson is not the Philistines' favorite person. And they surrounded the place and they set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning and then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and he pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. A city gate of a major city like Gaza at this time typically would have been 2 stories tall. It would have had massive posts on each side that were set in heavy bases. They didn't expect him that early. They expected him, I guess, at morning. But Samson gets up in the middle of the night, hoists the entire structure out of its receptacles, puts it on his back, and takes it all the way to Hebron, which was the chief city of Judah, which is a distance of 40 miles. Over 2,000 feet in elevation. He's going uphill over 2,000 feet at a distance. Now, we didn't maybe go all the way to Hebron, but he went to the hill next to it. 40 miles, carrying an impossible weight. Verse 4, that was woman number 3. Verse 4 is the only woman in the story for whom we have a name. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. What does Delilah mean? We don't know. There are several possibilities. There is a term in Akkadian that uses the same consonants, and it apparently means glory or praise. So we might call her Gloria, Delilah. Another possibility is an Arabic word very similar to this, which basically means flirt. So she might have been well named, that would be an appropriate name. Interestingly, the DLL, the three syllables or the three consonants that make up her name, also parallel an expression in Hebrew that means of the night. Delilah or Delilah in Hebrew means of the night, which is ironic because you have Shimshon, who is little son, meeting his kryptonite of the night. You're going to have a conflict between these two. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. The valley of Sorek begins about 13 miles from Jerusalem, which is up in the hill country, and it winds down toward the coast and ends out at the Mediterranean. It starts in Judah territory and winds up in Philistine territory. Interestingly, I've always assumed that Delilah was a Philistine woman, but it does not say so in the text. Also, from her name, we cannot discern with any certainty. The valley of Sorek was partly Israelite, partly Philistine. Where's Delilah in this mix? We don't know. Was she Jewish? We don't know. Was she Philistine? We don't know. We have not seen Samson give the time of day to a single Israelite woman thus far. He seemed to have a thing for Philistine women. I wish they all could be Philistinian. Beach Boy song, anyway. So she very likely, and obviously she's going to do business with the leaders of the Philistines. So maybe she was Philistine, but we just don't know. That's the simple fact. Verse 5, and the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him. Well, she'd already done that. And see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him or to torture him. The word can be translated. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. That would be 1,100 pieces of silver for each of the 5 Philistines' lords. Philistia was a pentapolis, 5 major cities. That's 5,500 shekels of silver, which would be 550 times the average annual wage. They were giving her 550 years worth of profit. Evidently, they wanted Samson real bad. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound that one could subdue you. She's not even being subtle. But since Samson was primarily thinking with his lower brain, it wasn't a problem. So verse 7, Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. This may sound silly to you in the age of science, but the Philistines dealt in the world of magic and superstition, and they were certain that the key to Samson's strength was something magical. So this would really go with them. This would be impressive to them. Now, Samson is playing her for a fool. But then he was a riddler. He liked playing these games. And he probably had some inkling that a question such as she had phrased was not meant for his longevity. Verse 8, then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. Second time we've seen that imagery. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. You already know this isn't going to work because that's what the Judahites did. They bound him with new ropes. So, verse 12, Delilah took new ropes. When is Samson going to wake up? This woman's trying to kill you, boy. And bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. We're not told what happened to the poor guys that were in ambush these 2 times. I don't think they probably made out too well. Verse 13. So 3rd time, then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Basically, we're dealing with a loom, an instrument for weaving cloth, for making dresses. And what Samson is basically saying is that if you interweave the 7 strands of my hair into the loom and then fasten it with a pin, he would be fastened to the loom by his head, lying back. Then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. By the way, the word pin here is a word we have discovered before in the book of Judges. And Jael took the tent peg. Same word. As one commentator noted, these 2 stories are meant to suggest each other to us. Both times, the scene of the action is a woman's sleeping quarters. Jael's tent, where Sisera, exhausted, is covered up. And of course, Delilah's house, where Samson is sleeping. Samson in this story is pictured like Sisera as being asleep in the presence of danger. This is like a word of warning. This is meant to suggest to us, uh-oh, dum, da, dum, dum, dum. You hear the music. Where do they hide the orchestra for all those scenes in movies anyway? The music clues you that you're in the midst or the presence of danger. But ironically, unlike Sisera, Samson walks away. Nothing happens. But you're left wondering, aren't you? This is too Sisera-like for Samson's own good. So verse 15, she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? Good grief. I would have looked her back in the eye and say, how can you say you love me? How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart. And he said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. All right, there were 3 things that a Nazarite was supposed to do, right? Strong drink. Don't cut your hair. And stay away from dead bodies. He sort of fouled up number 1 and number 2 already. At least the clues to the story strongly suggest that. Now we're at number 3. Verse 18, when she of the night saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. Payday. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Here's the irony. 3 times Samson lies to her. 1 time he tells her the truth. But Samson himself did not recognize the danger. The fact that he told the truth was simply, didn't matter. He did not cotton to the fact that the patience of the Lord had an end. He did not expect what happened. Well, who's fooled now? This is tragic. God's Nazarite, the one who is committed and set apart to God, and who has fouled up his life and his nest every possible way that he could. Have you noticed that of all the deliverers, of all the judges we have seen in the book of Judges, every other judge basically led an army, right? He delivered Israel by military victory. Samson never fought a single war for the sake of Israel. Samson never did a single thing for the sake of Israel. The only thing Samson ever did was for himself. The only time he killed Philistines was to get revenge or when his own life was in danger. The thought of delivering Israel never even crossed his mind. He is the ultimate narcissist. He did not know the Lord had left him. He thought that he could thumb his nose at God his entire life long and never be called to account. He literally did not recognize that telling the truth would undo him. But it did. Verse 21, when he broke that last Nazarite vow or requirement, it was the end of the line. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. That's where he had gone to the prostitute, remember? Brought him down. There's the phrase. He kept going down to Philistine, and now he is being brought down. And they bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So what? Well, we know that the hair had something to do with the vow. It's one of those little foreshadowings that's just kind of left hanging there. Now, verse 23, the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their God and to rejoice, for they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand. The ravager of our country who has killed many of us. Isn't it ironic? Yahweh was the one who gave Samson into their hand, but Dagon gets the credit. This is going to happen in the book of Samuel as well. Dagon's going to come off rather badly in that story, but that's another story. Dagon is a Canaanite god that was apparently co-opted or adopted by the Philistines after they arrived from Crete and Cyprus, and others came overland through Turkey, evidently. He apparently was, there are differing ideas about exactly what kind of a god Dagon was. He was apparently a fertility god of sorts, but he specifically is associated in the Old Testament with grain. He is a grain god, grain being a primary food source for survival. So when Samson had turned out the foxes with their burning torches into the standing grain, it was a direct offense against the grain god. It was an insult to Dagon. Now Dagon is being given credit for having taken revenge on Samson. Verse 25, and when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. Oh, by the way, notice also that when he was captured, 2 things happened. Number 1, they gouged out his eyes. Guess nothing seemed good in those eyes anymore. And they brought him down to Gaza, and he ground at the mill in the prison. So he is grinding grain, which is considered to be the work of either slaves or women in this culture. It was shameful for a man to be subjected to this. And it was also grinding the stuff that was the grain god's stuff. It was service to Dagon. Verse 25, when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. By the way, not far from this location, archaeologists have dug up the remains of another Philistine temple that is long, and it had a roof structure like this. And part way down the length of the roof structure were two pillars located in a center line in the center that were designed to support the vast weight of the roof. Probably the temple that Samson was in Gaza was very, very similar to the one that has been discovered not far away from there. And it had the pillars in the same kind of location, close next to each other, right there in the center line, supporting the roof. Then Samson called to the Lord. This is the second time that Samson prays, the only two times. Once when he was thirsty after the jawbone, and this time. And he says, O Lord Yahweh, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my two eyes. Bitter, cynical, and narcissistic to the bitter end. No concern about delivering Israel, no concern about loyalty to God. Vengeance is on his heart. But notice, God took the most selfish human being on the planet, and he used his natural tendencies to accomplish God's purposes. This is what God does. Do you remember when the early church was praying in Acts? I think it's chapter 4, where it says, you said in the Psalms, that the kings of the earth gathered together against your anointed, and surely Pontius Pilate and Herod gathered together against your anointed Jesus to do what? Only what your hand had predicated should happen. They thought they were doing their own thing, but their devices and plans really played into yours. So verse 29, Samson grasped the two middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those he killed during his life. He killed more people in demolishing the temple. Killed Dagon too, by the way. His statue was smashed to smithereens. And he killed at one time more people than all those he had slaughtered during his life. So going down really was the theme. He brought down the house, I believe the phrase is. Verse 31, then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up. Remember, Philistia was down, it was coastal. They brought him back up to the hill country between Zorah and Eshtaol, and buried him in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
Brother David,
Yes.
quick question. So he calls on God the second time and he dies with the Philistines. I was just wondering, what do you think about God just letting him basically commit suicide? I know he wasn't the greatest judge or the greatest leader, but I just think it's interesting that God basically grants him permission to die with the Philistines.
Well, it is interesting. I think in virtually every way that matters, Samson was as a person beyond redemption. It wasn't going to get better for him. And God uses, he granted his son permission to die too, interestingly enough, didn't he? And Jesus brought down the house as well. So God, Paul made a statement. He said, whether by life or by death, I might glorify God. And Samson wasn't worried about glorifying God, but God achieves his glory through both our life and our death. So yeah, it's pretty cynical, but basically it is a picture of where Israel was. Israel had become so godless, so broken, so utterly wicked, that the best God could do, the final judge of Israel, is a narcissistic, I can't use impolite words here,
Womanizer.
skirt chaser, womanizer, who never had a single thought about delivering Israel and did it mostly by accident. This is the final judge. This is the end of the line. The plane is nose down and headed for the ground. It's ugly, and it should be. But if you think Samson is bad, just wait till the two stories at the end of Judges. It's going to get worse, a lot worse. Okay, we are at the end of our time. Thank you all very much. You all have a wonderful week. Emmanuel, I see that you're on here. By the way, I got your homework assignment and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. We will not be here next week. So we will see you on what? The 21st. Until then, God bless. Keep your noses clean and watch out for Nazarite vows. Bye for now.